And welcome to the chat on Newsday Amarillo and News Channel 10-2. I'm David Lovejoy.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rhonda Lohnert.
And I'm Chuckalicious, Chuck Williams.
Join us, our good friend, Dr. Lance Izumi from the Pacific Research Institute. Education is what Dr. Izumi likes to talk about, and the changing and the difference and what we're facing in education. And we were all just talking off the air. Good morning, Dr. Izumi. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Great to be back here with all of you. Happens to be my birthday, of all things.
Hey,
Happy birthday, Dr. Izumi. Happy birthday. There you go. Doctor, we were talking about education, and we look forward to 2024, but we would be remiss if we didn't look back at 23 and past. We've got a problem. It's a small one now, but it's festering. It's getting bigger. COVID really did a wallop on our educational system. It has really skewed things out of control. And what I'm seeing is there's a generation of kids who won't be completely educated, who will never make up that work, will never make up those early learning skills, those early tasks. That can only mean disaster down the road. What's your viewpoint on that? Do we have a chance of making that gap up from the lost time to COVID?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, David. We are facing a huge crisis right now. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing now is that now that COVID has passed, we're seeing the research that is coming out to show exactly how much of a problem these kids have had because of that COVID shutdown in many cases. And what we've seen is just horrific, really. A study came out from Harvard and Stanford universities just recently showing that students had a quarter year's worth of reading loss and half a year's loss in mathematics because of COVID. And in some cities, and this is even more tragic, in some cities, the learning loss in mathematics is actually a year and a half.
Whoa.
A year and a half worth of learning loss in mathematics. And that's really frightening because when you think about trying to get back that learning loss, it's almost impossible, especially if you're talking about students who are now progressing, let's say, beyond their basic arithmetic into the more difficult subjects, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, all those sorts of things. I mean, if you had that learning loss during those times where you're trying to achieve proficiency in those more difficult subjects, it's very difficult to try and make up that type of loss. And so I think one of the things we're seeing is, unfortunately, on top of that learning loss, we're seeing kind of a covering over of that learning loss. And one of the ways that we've seen that is the lessening of grading standards in the classroom. We've seen a lot of teachers who have, canceled more difficult projects for their students, have made it easier to pass the course. And so while the kids seem to be back on track, maybe they're earning A's and B's. If you actually look at the difficulty and the rigor required to achieve those grades, it may not be as difficult as it was before the pandemic because we've had grade inflation and this response to the COVID shutdowns by basically trying to keep those kids pushed along, in the school system. So I think that what you're going to see, as you mentioned, David, is that down the road, that once these kids then hit college and into the marketplace, it's going to be a real disaster, unfortunately, not only for those kids, but for America in general.
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay, because I do have this 15-year-old that is, he's struggling in math, and he's always been my straight A. So is when you look at the statistics, is math the biggest gap that we're looking at trying to build a bridge across? Is that the main thing that's suffered?
Yes, Rhonda, that's exactly right. If you look at the subjects where the kids have suffered, they've suffered in all the subjects, but they've especially suffered in mathematics because, math, as you know and as every parent knows, is a discipline where your current knowledge is built upon previous knowledge, right?
Right.
And so in order to do geometry, you need to know algebra. If in order to do algebra, you need to know, your basic mathematics. Well, if that pipeline is disturbed, right, then it becomes very difficult for you to then proceed in mathematics, because so much of it is built upon the scaffolding that had occurred previously. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen, unfortunately, with kids, is that their mathematics education has been disrupted. And because of that disruption, we've seen that a gap occur that is very difficult then to backfill, because you're trying to backfill it while you're also trying to teach those kids maybe the current subject, which they need the previous subject matter in order to do well. And so I think that's what makes it more difficult for kids to get back on track with mathematics, as opposed to maybe English and some of the other subjects where, there are difficulties there too. But mathematics especially is someplace where you're going to see the most difficult problem in terms of remediating these kids.
Well, and that's my deal is, my son, he is a sophomore, and, pre-AP and, all that good stuff. But he's really questioning whether he can handle these subjects coming up. And, and we're trying to look at big picture, college and everything that's going to come with that. But because he looks at me and he says, okay, it's algebra, Mom, and I just don't get it. And I look at him and I'm like, well, you're not getting it from me. That's for sure. So are there things that we can do as parents to help our children that are struggling with some of these deficits that have come with COVID?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that parents, have tried to do is, let's put it this way. One of the things in general that both the school systems and others have been pushing is increased tutoring for kids. And so I know that a lot of parents, have hired private tutors or are going to tutoring services, after school services, those sorts of things. I myself had real difficulties in mathematics when I was growing up. And so my parents, put me in an after-school tutoring program. I know that a lot of parents, if they have the means, are going that way. One of the things that you see in the States is, a lot of the COVID money that the federal government has distributed to the states, to the schools. The federal government distributed $190 billion, that's billion with a B, to the states during COVID for relief to the K-12 school systems. And that comes out to about $4,000 per kid. And some of that money should have been going to tutoring and services and after school services in order to remediate these kids to make up for those learning losses, like your son is having in algebra, having difficulties there. And the one problem that the states have had when they're trying to get tutoring, because tutoring sounds like a great, silver bullet, right? And it is in one, but the trouble is that are you going to be able to get enough tutors? Because if you have so many children who are suffering from this problem, tutoring is usually viewed as being a one-on-one, or at least a one with a small group of kids. But when you have basically the entire student body maybe suffering from learning loss in mathematics, how are you going to get enough tutors in order to be able to tutor all those children? And we hear often of a teacher shortage in the United States. Well, if there's a teacher shortage in the United States, well, how can you get then this entire army of tutors in order to teach those kids, at the drop of a hat? Where are you going to find them? That's the difficulty I think a lot of states have had, is to not just the money, but where are you going to find that personnel in order to carry out this tutoring agenda that you want to have?
Did we spend, and we'll take a quick break here, but that's a question we're going to delve into. What happened with the money? Billions of dollars were poured in from COVID funds. What have districts been doing with that money, and what are we getting for it? We'll take a quick break. We're back with more from Dr. Izumi right here on the chat on Newsday Amarillo and News Channel 10-2.